Some actually fascinating moments when President Trump was interviewed by Maria Bartiromo over on Fox News. Now, he has famously said, I can end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Been a bit scant on the details whenever he was pressed on CNN and in previous interviews. He's given us the most detail yet to date, and things took a little bit of a plot twist inside the answer. Here's what he had to say.
You said you could end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours.
Yes, I could.
How would you do that?
I know Zelensky very well. I felt he was very honorable because when they asked him about the perfect phone call that I made, he said it was indeed perfect. He said it was, he didn't even know what they were talking about. He could have grandstanded, oh, I felt threatened.
Well, that's not going to be enough for Putin to stop bombing Ukraine.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that I know Zelensky very well and I know Putin very well, even better. And I had a good relationship, very good with both of them. I would tell Zelensky, no more. You got to make a deal. I would tell Putin, if you don't make a deal, we're going to give them a lot. We're going to give them more than they ever got if we have to. I will have the deal done in one day. One day.
So in the same breath as saying I'm going to have the deal done in one day, he's also actually putting on the table, offering Ukraine even more military aid than ever before, really taking off any sort of breaks or anything in terms of escalation if Putin doesn't agree to what he wants. I mean, it is a plausible strategy. I guess it's akin to like a Nixonian madman strategy. It also risks a lot of escalation. And this is always the issue with Trump, is you actually have no idea what you're going to get. He can come out with a statement against cluster bombs all he wants. He said he wanted to reset our relationship with Russia. While he was president, he broke the Obama standard and actually shipped more Javelin missiles into the conflict, arguably actually heated up the Civil War and got us to a point where the invasion seemed to appear justified or whatever on the Putin side, at least in the eyes of Putin, around how the West, really was united against him. Not validating the reasoning, just saying, though, that he did certainly contribute to that. Same in terms of sanctions. He sanctioned historic amounts of Russian officials. And often, Krystal, the way that he would do it is he would say, like, look, I'm being tougher on Russia than Obama, just to try and circumvent the Russiagate criticism.
Yeah.
It both didn't work in terms of stopping the criticism and also arguably completely cut against any rhetoric that he was making on an actual policy level. Nord Stream pipeline is another good example. Like in almost every case, he was far more hawkish on Russia than President Obama was. So he may say he's against, cluster munitions to Ukraine, like he put out that statement, but he's also very much leaving himself the door open for way more than like the dreams of all the hawks in the Biden administration.
Do not count on former President Trump to be your anti-war hero because, I mean, listen, we've got the record.
Yeah.
One of the many disservices that the news media did in poisoning everybody's brains with Russiagate is they had the exact wrong criticism of Trump. The idea was, oh, he loves Putin, he's so soft on Putin, Putin's his bestie, et cetera, et cetera. And listen, to be fair, Trump played into it with some of his comments and, the way that he personally behaved towards Vladimir Putin. In terms of his policy actions, he was hawkish. He was more hawkish than the Obama administration. And that was where the real criticism should have been, is some of those actions which helped to precipitate this particular crisis that we are now dealing with. You saw this on a variety of issues as well. He was extraordinarily hawkish towards Iran. He talked a big game about getting out of Afghanistan, but ultimately it left it to Joe Biden to actually, pull out of that country, which was a very difficult situation. So, yeah. And even within his rhetoric on Ukraine, he has vacillated between saying that Biden is not hawkish enough, he's not doing enough, he needs to do more, he needs to be more aggressive, and the sort of, let's get this deal done, let's negotiate, I have the war over in 24 hours. He has vacillated between those two extremes, and I think it is the only thing that we could expect is that he would continue to do the same. And I also think that we're about to talk about the way that the Republican base feels about the Ukrainian conflict. I think the extent of the reluctance to continue with military aid towards Ukraine, I think Trump has a lot to do with that. And I think he has really helped to drive up that sentiment within the Republican Party. But I also think it could flip on a dime, where you could easily, if he starts coming out and saying, we should have sent F-16 sooner, we should have sent cluster bombs sooner, we should be doing even more, we should let them hit Russia and not complain about it, you could easily see the Republican base flipping to a position of Biden's not being strong enough, he's not being hawkish enough. And because the news media always is in favor of more hawkishness, they would help to beat those drums as well.
I saw it in Afghanistan. You had a bunch of people who said we need to pull out of Afghanistan. But like, wait, not like that, even though it's under a Trump peace deal. And, before the inevitable, but we should have kept on Bagram. Yeah, apparently everybody online is a military genius that can figure this out. The problem that comes always to the fore is that when it's actually time to limit the amount of aid, press for a diplomatic solution, the media is going to go against you. So then, are you actually going to stand in your convictions? With Trump, he consistently did not do that. He escalated troops in Afghanistan. He didn't actually pull out up until the end of his presidency, even whenever he did sign that peace deal with the Taliban. The Russia, we gave numerous policy examples. So there's a lot to doubt whenever it comes to some of his rhetoric. And, to your point also in terms of the debate and kind of where it stands, let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. A shot across the bow from Ben Shapiro. This is really against Tucker Carlson, J.D. Vance in some of their more recent comments on Ukraine. He's saying, quote, Ukraine is becoming a litmus test for Republican candidates because of the bad faith argument that if you think we must fund Ukraine in its war against Russia, you don't care about American poverty. This is wrong. The two issues are not connected. First off, pouring money into poverty-ridden areas does not result in prosperity. That has nothing to do with Ukraine. Half the people now promoting this line now have spoken out openly against it in the past. You can be skeptical of Ukrainian military aid while still being in favor of entitlement reform. I love how he puts that one in there. Second off, the notion that America has no interest in Ukraine is untrue. We have an interest in the Russian military being defanged so they do not invade surrounding nations, thus threatening global supply chains and threatening American opponents. We have an interest in deterring China from invading Taiwan. We are now stuck in this weird binary straw man in which we are told that we must fund Ukraine, quote, until they win, as long as it takes, without defining winning. And looks like, does it mean withdrawing all aid, thus leading Russia to take Kyiv in terms of defining what stopping is? Quote, all nuance is lost in politics pretty quickly. It is always much easier to malign your opponents as uncaring about their fellow Americans, but demagoguery comes at a pretty high societal cost. So, clearly, he's coming out there a little bit in favor of aid to Ukraine. I also would note, if we look at the actual comments we played on our show yesterday, Krystal, Mike Pence can say that he got caught and was responding to one part of the answer all you want, but rhetorically, it's a terrible look whenever you're saying, quote, it is not my concern whenever you're asked about the binary. I also think that one of the reasons why this analysis is spurious is because everyone's like, well, we can do both at the same time, but we're not doing both at the same time. One gets massive bipartisan majorities and timeliness, and one doesn't, with no consensus whatsoever. Now, in terms of the debate, I think we should always be honest here about Ukraine. A lot of people want to continue and increase military support to Ukraine. Not all Republicans actually do agree on Ukraine. There is room for debate in the party, and we're about to show everybody polling to that effect. But, and I think this is the big but, ask yourself if that number, the number of Republicans, is representative of the number of Republicans in the Senate, of the number of Republicans in the debate. Why is it only like 4 people? I can count on one hand the number of people who are actual GOP elected leaders or officials who are actually against the Ukraine consensus. That, to me, is what the real imbalance looks like.
That is an interesting point, that there's a difference. So the Republican base, based on the polling that we can see, and it always depends a bit on how the question is asked and what the particular moment is in the conflict. It looked like after the Prigozhin-Wagner coup attempt thing, support for Ukraine increased in the wake of that. But it appears that the Republican base is basically split 50-50 on whether they want to continue military aid, whether they're of the sort of Mike Pence view, or whether they're of the, Trumpian when he's articulating the let's just get to the table and get this thing resolved immediately when he's articulating that view. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen from the Washington Post that broke this down, because there's a real difference between if you ask the overall Republican base how they feel about the conflict versus the most plugged in online activist base of the party, which is overwhelmingly against continuing military aid to Ukraine. So the headline here is GOP Ukraine skeptics dominate the debate, but not the party. You've got some numbers here that, sort of illustrate the point. You had a Quinnipiac poll last month that showed 66% of Americans said supporting Ukraine was in the national interest of the U.S., while just 28% said it was not. Even among Republicans, you had a 52% majority that said it was in our interest compared to 40% who said it was not. In an Economist YouGov poll last month, you found a similar result. Twice as many Americans favored increasing or keeping the same amount of aid as supported decreasing it. Neither among Republicans nor among 2020 Trump voters was decreasing aid a majority position. So in many of these polls, you find actually a majority of the Republican base supports the Ukraine consensus. It's hardly a surprise, given the fact that, elected Republican elites hold that position, given the fact that the media is almost uniformly in support of that position. But then again, you turn to, put this next piece up on the screen from Mediaite, you turn to, the activists at the Turning Point USA conference, and they did a straw poll on this very question, and they found that 95.8% of attendees in that straw poll said they oppose the U.S. supporting Ukraine against Russia. So I tried to make this point yesterday. I think if you're thinking about this issue and you're just thinking about the politics of it and you're a Republican presidential contender, you might be on the correct side of overall GOP sentiment if you have the Mike Pence, let's continue to support them, or the Chris Christie, let's continue to support them position. But in terms of the people who are most motivated, who are most organized, and who, frankly, I think care the most about this issue, they're all on the other side of that. And, it's a similar dynamic that we see play out with issues like abortion. Again, taking your particular position on these issues and how you feel about them out of it. You have a very hardcore, very well-organized, very active, very engaged base of the Republican Party that has some very hard anti-abortion positions that don't even line up with where the rest of the GOP base is. Same thing on LGBTQ issues. And so once again, you've got an issue with Ukraine where I think the most active, the most organized, the people who care the most about the issue are on one side, and then you have a different sentiment among the rest of the GOP.
Yeah, I think those are always excellent points, is that if the party faithful believes something, the activist base, you can take over and you can really run the table. That's what the Tea Party was able to do back in 2010. And in this case, it very much could be just, even though we have a few lawmakers, people like Rand Paul, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, J.D. Vance, and Trump, Trump is the most popular figure, and those are some of his most loyal allies inside of Congress. So the Turning Point USA poll is probably one of the most important ones around where the energy is. There's also, don't forget about those comments from House Speaker Kevin McCarthy previously about no more Ukraine aid would pass, even though Mitch McConnell and all of them do disagree. But I think that the overall, fracture inside of this is interesting because it also shows that Trump is leaving the door open. He's not closing the door. He's not actually ideologically committed to an actual, reducing aid, making sure that you drive Kyiv to the table and to the bargaining table. He really is, opening the door to even more military aid if needed, and politically could make that case quite easily, I think, to the Republicans. I also do think, in terms of why a lot of Republicans, specifically primary voters, do support some of the Ukraine consensus, a lot of these people are old. Old people are still locked into a Cold War mindset. I was born after the Cold War ended. I don't care or really think about it at all. These people, they, when you go through nuclear drills and all that stuff, I think for a lot of people like our generation, Krystal, millennial generation, we will probably never be able to forget the specters of 9/11 and Islamic terrorism. Whereas, if you were born, let's say in 2009, you really didn't even come of age up until your memories and all that. You're really in the post-Islamic terror era. So you'd be like, what are you talking about? You guys had threat levels in airports. So I think it's the same, the same in terms of the carryover effect, and it'll stick with you for the rest of your life. So anyway, just an interesting corollary, I think, to the politics of it.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.